In the last video, we went over what were some of the strengths of the South and the strengths of the North. And now we're going to look at some of the other, specifically, down to specific resources and things like that that would have made a difference. Again, you can see here the population issue. Now, in order to supply an army, you need to have money. And where do the people keep their money? In banks. And so you can see the majority of the bank deposits, the dark blue, is the North. Again, the factories, when I explain those other numbers, the graph can make it much clearer. The idea of growing cotton, 99.9% was the South, only 0.1% in the North. Food crops, you can see more than double the North had available food, and you needed this to feed the soldiers. Horses. Horses that are moving the troops and moving supplies. Donkeys and mules. Now horses can move faster. Donkeys and mules, which are mostly more farm type animals than transportation type animals, is obviously in the South. And then the idea of the railroad tracks, moving things from factories and moving those supplies. Here again is another pictorial vision of all the railroad lines in the North as opposed to the South. And you can see, especially here in what we call the breadbasket of the farmland here in Illinois and Indiana, Iowa, Missouri, all these railroad lines of just being able to move supplies and food to the factories, and the factories using those resources to make things for the troops. So much easier movement. And here we have a picture of the Union and the Confederacy by 1861. So we Lincoln was elected, we kind of go through the whole year. We have secession, we have the Battle of Fort Sumter, and now through the rest of that year, both sides are beginning to train and gather and organize their military. So by 1861, this is what the two sides look like. Here are the different territories, and here are the Southern Confederate states, the slave states. Here are the northern non-slave states. These are the Union states, which includes Missouri, Kentucky, and Maryland. Remember, even though they allowed slavery, they still stayed in the Union. One thing that there were such strong feelings about staying in the Union, the state rights, the individual rights given to them to have slaves. Many times there was fighting amongst families where you would have one brother who would fight for the South and one brother who would fight for the North. And this is an example. These are sons of a senator in Kentucky, and both his sons fought on two different sides, Union and Confederate. Mary Lincoln, the wife of the president, had 4 brothers who fought for the South, the Confederacy. And so this wasn't only a division within the nation, defined by 2 specific sides. This was the division behind the front door of the citizens of the nation. Many front doors. Many an argument, many a family dispute happened because of the war. So, now they've developed their armies, and they're organizing things. People are signing up, families are getting divided. What were the specific strategies of the North and the South? In order to wage a war, you have to have specific strategies that you think will work to get you to win. And we will look at those. The leader of the Confederacy was President Jefferson Davis. They identified themselves as a whole new nation. And they came up with a certain strategy. They looked and they understood that they had limited strengths in terms of factories, in terms of mobility and railroads. And so they knew we don't have those things to move our troops all over and to supply them. So we're going to come up with a defensive strategy, a strategy where we are going to make the North come to us, and we will defend our And remember, it was their land. It was their way of life. That's how they thought. If somebody told you, you cannot do something you think is your right, you really push back hard. And that's what the South did. And that was their strategy for waging the war. The North, on the other hand, knew they overpowered them with manpower and supplies and things like that. And these really, remember, there were some families fighting families. This is fellow citizens. They used to be citizens of the same country. The goal was not to wipe them out. The goal was not to destroy them. The goal was what they called the Anaconda Plan. Now, the anaconda is a snake found in the jungles of South America. And it's a very large snake and extremely strong. And what the snake does is it will wrap itself around its prey and squeeze the prey to death. And so this was the strategy of the North. They thought, we will use our Navy. Remember, the South really didn't have one. We will use our Navy and our Army to cut the South off, so they can't get supplies, so they can't get reinforcements, so they will kind of lose the fuel to fight the war. And that the plan was to do that to minimize casualties. So we start the battles, and we're going to be looking at some of these really important battles of the Civil War. The first one is Fort Sumter, and we talked about that. And the next one was the first Battle of Bull Run. There were two battles there. The first one happened right, that summer of 1861. So we're about a year and a half into the war now. We have Shiloh, the second Battle of Bull Run, and then Antietam. And here's a map that will show you some of the battles we are looking at. Here is Fort Sumter. Here it is in relation to Charleston Harbor in South Carolina. So that's the first one. And then up here is Bull Run in Manassas. And then we have Shiloh. And then we have Antietam. So these were very close to each other. Bull Run is there. Antietam is in Maryland. Shiloh is out here in Tennessee, and Fort Sumter. And this gives you an idea. Another one that's not mentioned on those battles is the battle between the Monitor and the Merrimack. And we're going to talk a little later about technology, about the use of ironclads, in how ships now entered into the war. This is where we're going to start with our very first Battle of Bull Run. It was right here outside of Washington, D.C. in Virginia. And here's Washington, D.C., and there's Bull Run. And we will look at this in a little bit more detail in our next video.